November 21st, 1997. Powhattan, Kansas. 28-year-old Jodie Bordeaux, who happens to be 7 months pregnant, is spending the evening with her husband at their rural farmhouse when several bullets from a semi-automatic rifle are fired into the residence. A bullet strikes Jodie in the head and kills her instantly, and her unborn baby daughter, Shay, also dies. There is speculation that Jodie's murder might be connected to a conflict from her workplace involving a troublesome employee who was fired while she was a manager, but since there is not enough evidence to implicate anyone in the crime, it remains unsolved. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today we're going to be exploring a heartbreaking story which was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the 1997 murder of Jodie Bordeaux. Or should I say, the murder of Jodie and her unborn baby daughter, Shay Bordeaux. At the time of her death, Jodie and her husband, Sean Bordeaux, lived together at a rented farmhouse in rural Kansas, and she was 7 months pregnant with their first child. However, their lives would be ruined when someone fired a series of bullets from a semi-automatic rifle into the residence, and one of them struck Jodie in the head and caused the deaths of both her and her child. This crime took place near the Kickapoo Reservation, and Jodie and Sean had worked at a local Native American-owned casino, but there seemed to be some resentment over the fact that a white woman like Jodie was promoted to a management position, and she frequently clashed with one particular employee who wound up being fired for his poor performance. This employee would file a grievance which led to Jodie losing her job, but just when it seemed like she was on the verge of being rehired, things escalated into violence. Of course, there's been speculation that this situation may have played a role in Jodie's murder, and that multiple individuals could have been involved, but here we are nearly 28 years later, and the authorities still do not have enough evidence to make an arrest. It's possible that numerous people within the community know who was responsible for this crime and could have key information, but a code of silence has prevented them from coming forward, so Jodie's loved ones are frustrated that this has managed to go unsolved for so long. Anyway, after I'm done discussing this case, I'm going to take a few moments to talk about the 2002 murder of Amanda Aldridge, another pregnant woman who was shot to death inside her home, this time in Louisiana. This case has not gotten a lot of coverage and there is very little information available, but a listener named Chris recently suggested that I cover it, and since the crime has a number of parallels to Jodie Bordeaux's murder, I thought this episode would be an appropriate opportunity to talk about it. However, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, and more. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word and garner us more exposure. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has nearly 90 exclusive bonus episodes in our archives, which are not available on our regular feed. So with all that out of the way, let us now delve into the murder of Jodie Bordeaux. Our story begins in Kansas in 1997, and our central figure is 28-year-old Jodie Lynn Bordeaux. Jodie was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and while not much information is available about her early life, Her birth father died in a drowning accident in 1981, and her obituary listed her as being survived by a mother, stepfather, and adoptive father. While attending the University of Nebraska, Jodie met her future husband, Sean Bordeaux. Sean was part Native American since his father was a Sicangu Lakota, and he grew up on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota as part of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. Jodie and Sean got married in October of 1995, and within a few months, they relocated to Powhattan, Kansas, a small village located in Brown County, which is named after the father of Pocahontas, and only had a population of about 100 people at that time. They moved into a rented farmhouse located on an isolated rural side road just north of Hazelnut Road and 175th Street. Since Sean's uncle had experience helping start up casinos located on Native American land, he was able to get his foot in the door at an establishment called the Golden Eagle Casino, which was located on the Kickapoo Reservation in the town of Horton and opened in May of 1996. Since it was run by the Kickapoo tribe, it was the first Native American-owned casino in the state of Kansas and was located only 4 miles from the Bordeaux farmhouse. The casino generated millions in revenue and offered a number of jobs and opportunities for the local Kickapoo residents. Sean was hired to work as an assistant manager, and Jodie also got a job there and eventually got promoted to staff supervisor of the slot machines department. Jodie and Sean had always wanted to start a family, but after suffering through 2 miscarriages, Jodie decided to consult with a fertility expert, and after a few months, she finally became pregnant. The couple later found out that their baby was going to be a girl and decided that they would name her Jordan Shay Bordeaux. However, Jodie started facing problems at work as there seemed to be resentment from some of the Kickapoo employees over a white woman being promoted to a management position, and since Sean was only half Native American and belonged to a different tribe, the same jealousy was directed towards him as well. Jodie frequently clashed with one particular Kickapoo employee who worked as a slot technician, though his name has never been released publicly. This employee was known for having a bad attitude and frequently showing up late, and he also accused Jodie of fabricating excuses to get extra time off for herself. One of Jodie's responsibilities was overseeing the performances of the employees and filing reports about their behavior, though all final decisions involving the casino were made by the Kickapoo Tribal Council. Well, even though Jodie wrote up this employee numerous times, he did not improve, so she reported his performance issues to the Tribal Council. A meeting took place in which the employee was brought in front of the Casino Management Board for review, and he wound up being reprimanded and placed on probation. Regardless, the employee continued to cause problems with Jodie, and things finally escalated to the point where he wound up being fired. But a few weeks later, this employee filed a grievance against Jodie with the Tribal Council, alleging that she had shown up 1 hour late for work every shift for an entire week and was refusing to carry money bags at the casino. Jodie acknowledged that this was true, as she had been attending her appointments at a fertility clinic in another town, but even though this caused her to arrive late for her shifts, she would make up the time she missed later on. She also confirmed that the only reason she did not want to carry any heavy money bags was because of her prior history of miscarriages, as she did not want to risk her pregnancy. In spite of this, Jodie still wound up losing her job over the employee's grievance in August of 1997. Over the course of the next 3 months, Jodie kept petitioning to get her job back, and after a meeting was held to discuss the matter, the Tribal Council agreed that they should reconsider their original decision and possibly hire her back at the casino. Well, once word spread that Jodie might be getting rehired, she started receiving a series of unsettling anonymous phone calls in which no one would be on the line whenever she answered. These calls lasted for weeks and would always take place whenever Sean was at work and she was home alone. One night, Jodie called Sean at the casino to tell him that she had been hearing a series of strange noises outside their farmhouse, which made her fear that she was being watched. Sean tried to assure Jodie that the sounds were probably nothing more than animals such as a raccoon or a coyote. He still contacted the police and asked them to stop by the house to check things out, though by the time they arrived they found nothing. On November the 19th, Jodie and Sean went out of town to Topeka to have dinner and do some shopping, as Jodie wanted to buy an outfit for Jordan Shay. Sean was against the idea at first because due to Lakota tradition, it was considered to be bad luck to buy something for a child before they were born. But Sean eventually relented, and both he and Jodie wound up purchasing 2 separate outfits for their daughter. Jodie and Sean spent the following evening at home together, and at around 12:40 a.m. on November the 21st, they were watching television in the living room when Sean said that one of their dogs started barking as if he had been startled by something. Sean was about to go check it out when he suddenly heard what he described as several loud pops, which he initially believed were the sound of a light bulb exploding in the lamp behind his recliner. But when Sean noticed dust and debris in the air, it became apparent that this was the sound of gunshots being fired into the farmhouse. Sean ran for cover into the kitchen and wound up saving his own life because seconds later, a bullet went right through the recliner he had been sitting in. Jodie ran for cover into the bedroom as the living room was riddled with bullets from a high-powered semi-automatic rifle. After the shooting stopped, Sean looked through the bedroom doorway and saw that Jodie was now lying on the floor. He rushed to her aid and was horrified to discover that she had been struck in the head by a bullet which was fired into the bedroom. Her wound was just above the left eye, so Sean immediately applied a tube sock to it. While this was going on, Sean said that he could hear the sound of a vehicle speeding away outside. Unfortunately, it was apparent that Jodie had been killed instantly, but Sean was still hoping to save the life of Jordan Shay, so he called 911. While waiting for help to arrive, Sean held Jodie's body in his arms and laid his head against his wife's stomach and kissed it, but he said it soon became apparent that he was kissing his unborn baby daughter goodbye. It took 15 minutes for paramedics and officers from the Brown County Sheriff's Office to arrive at the scene, but while they attempted to rush Jodie to the hospital, it was located 15 miles away, so Jordan Shay did not make it. A homicide investigation would be launched by the Sheriff's Office, and they were assisted by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. The community was left shocked by the crime, as Brown County barely averaged 1 murder per year. Since Jodie was 7 months pregnant, the Brown County Attorney's Office attempted to determine if Jordan Shay was considered by law to be a viable fetus, which would allow the perpetrator to be charged with 2 counts of murder. But according to a previous case from 1989, a fetus was not included in the Kansas statute regarding homicide. Jodie's funeral services were held in her hometown of Lincoln, and both she and Jordan Shay would be laid to rest at Lincoln Memorial Park. Jordan Shay was wrapped in a special Lakota quilt and dressed in the outfits that her parents had purchased for her 2 days before she died. In the days following the murders, Sean moved his belongings out of their farmhouse because he couldn't take living there anymore. He eventually left Kansas and returned home to South Dakota to live on the Rosebud Reservation in the town of Mission. Sean was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but claimed that he never got a look at the individual who fired the fatal shots, and since the farmhouse was located in such an isolated area, there did not appear to be any other witnesses to the incident. Shell casings were collected outside the residence, which corresponded with the entry holes for the bullets, but the murder weapon was never found. If the crime had taken place on the Kickapoo Reservation, it would have fallen under federal jurisdiction, so the FBI may have been able to take over the investigation. However, even though the farmhouse sat within the original boundaries of the Kickapoo Reservation, a treaty from 1862 had shrunk the boundaries, so this technically left the residence 2 miles outside the reservation borders as recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. At one point, some former Kickapoo tribal council members wrote a letter to then United States Attorney General Janet Reno asking for federal assistance, but were told that nothing could be done. Based on the information obtained during the investigation, the authorities were inclined to believe that Jodie was killed by someone she knew, and the crime may have been related to her job at the Golden Eagle Casino. Of course, the former casino employee who had clashed with Jodie was investigated, but while he has never been publicly named as a suspect, it does not sound like he has been ruled out either, and there has always been speculation that multiple people were involved in the crime. Even though the Kickapoo Tribal Council offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the shooter, one of the biggest obstacles in the investigation was that there was not much trust between the local Native American residents and non-Native American law enforcement, and rumors circulated that anyone who might have had information about the crime feared potential retribution if they came forward. The case would be featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries which aired in August of 2001, but it's been reported that there were members of the Kickapoo Tribal Council who declined to be interviewed on the show after they received threats. Regardless, the episode did feature an interview with Tribal Council Chairperson Nancy Bear, who appealed for anyone with information to come forward, stating, quote, "If there are members of the Kickapoo tribe that have any information that would help us solve this, they have a responsibility to their fellow tribal members, to their fellow community members, to come forward. This is an unsolved crime here on our lands. Let's do something about it." End quote. Unfortunately, the episode did not pave the way to a resolution, but as the years have gone on, investigators have stated that they have identified 3 potential suspects in Jodie's murder, but lacked the evidence to charge them, and they also believe that alcohol was a factor in what happened. After returning to South Dakota, Sean became the director of the Institute of Tribal Lands at Sintaglaska University, and he has also found a successful career in politics, as he served in the South Dakota House of Representatives and as a Democratic member for the 26th District in the South Dakota Senate. During one interview, he addressed the deaths of his wife and daughter by stating, quote, "Nothing we did was so bad to have anything like this done to us. In the Indian way, whoever takes a life wrongly pays for it 2 to 4-fold. Sometimes it takes a generation, but they will pay." End quote. But unfortunately, after nearly 28 years, the murders of Jodie and Jordan Shay continue to remain unsolved. So I guess you could say the trail went cold. So this is definitely one of the most heartbreaking cases ever featured on Unsolved Mysteries, but surprisingly, it has not gotten all that much mainstream media coverage outside the show. It has mostly just been featured in Kansas-based publications such as the Topeka Capital Journal and the indigenous-based media platform Indian Country Today, though I was happy to see it featured last year on the true crime podcast/YouTube show Detective Perspective, hosted by Derek Levasseur. But other than that, there really isn't all that much information out there, even though you would think that a pregnant woman being shot to death inside her own home in front of her husband would be the type of story that the mainstream media would just latch onto. There also appears to be a political angle to this case as well, since Jodie was a white woman who worked on and lived near a Native American reservation, and there have always been rumors about a code of silence and a culture of fear which has prevented local residents from coming forward with key information which might help get this case solved. One person you definitely have to feel a lot of sympathy for is Jodie Bordeaux, and his interview on Unsolved Mysteries is just so sad to watch. It was particularly heartbreaking to hear him say that he took comfort in the fact that Jodie was killed instantly and did not have to suffer, but he also had a difficult time living with the idea that his unborn daughter, Jordan Shay, did not die right away and had to experience a slow, painful death inside her mother's womb. Sean also seemed to feel guilt over the fact that even though Jodie was ducking for cover in the bedroom, she may have stuck her head out into the open to look for him and check that he was okay, and this is when the stray bullet wound up hitting her. Ironically, Sean has said that one of the reasons he and Jodie moved to Powhattan is because they wanted to get away from all the crime which was prevalent in the large city of Lincoln, Nebraska, and, well, look what happened. When researching this episode, I was surprised to discover that Jodie Bordeaux now has his own Wikipedia page that only features information about his political career and makes no mention of this case. However, the Wikipedia page does mention that Sean has one child, so I hope that means he has gotten to experience some happiness in the years following this tragedy. I also wonder if Sean has ever attempted to use his political influence to launch a federal investigation into his wife and daughter's murders, as in the years following the crime, he has always openly expressed his frustration about the lack of progress from the Kansas authorities. Now, even though it's been reported that Sean was quickly ruled out as a suspect, it's perhaps inevitable that there are still online discussions about this case, in which some amateur sleuths have expressed their suspicions about him. It is true that since there were no independent eyewitnesses, we technically only have Sean's word about how the events unfolded that night, but since there were no apparent problems in the marriage, and it sounds like Sean was really looking forward to becoming a father, what possible motive could he have had for killing his wife and unborn daughter? From a practical standpoint, if Sean did this, he would have needed to shoot Jodie and the farmhouse with a high-powered semi-automatic rifle and then somehow gotten rid of the murder weapon before the police arrived. And if Sean hired someone to commit this crime, why wouldn't he have done so on a night when he was at work and Jodie was home alone, as this was when she usually received those anonymous harassing phone calls? Yeah, I really have no trouble stating with 100% certainty that the husband did it is not a viable theory in this case. While no one has ever been publicly named as a suspect or person of interest, the only individual who seemed to have an apparent motive to want Jodie dead is the employee that she helped get fired from their place of employment, the Golden Eagle Casino. Since this was the first Native American-owned casino in the history of Kansas, it was going to provide jobs for local members of the Kickapoo tribe, but it sounds like there was some resentment over the fact that a white woman like Jodie got promoted to a supervisory position relatively quickly, and since this particular employee was Kickapoo, I am guessing he did not appreciate having to take orders from her. However, I do find the circumstances of how Jodie lost her job at the casino to be really odd. To recap, this employee wound up being fired as a result of Jodie's consistently poor performance reviews for him, yet when he decided to file a grievance with the Kickapoo Tribal Council over her being late for her shifts, she wound up being fired, though as far as I can tell, it did not lead to the employee getting his own job back. I would be really curious to know what the Tribal Council's rationale was for this decision. The story goes that Jodie showed up 1 hour late for work for an entire week because she needed to go out of town for treatment at a fertility clinic, but even though she made up the time later on, did she not get prior approval to do this? If Jodie was an otherwise good employee, why would the council fire her solely on the complaint of a disgruntled former employee who had a number of credibility issues? I have to assume that there's more to this story, and that Jodie may have been a pawn in some sort of political game, but it does seem like the tribal council later regretted their decision and were planning to hire Jodie back at some point in the future. But I guess the big question is, did this whole situation cause things to escalate into violence? Well, it sounds like once word started to spread that Jodie might return to the casino, that's when she started getting weird anonymous phone calls at home, though it does not sound like the caller ever said anything and just remained silent on the line. However, the calls always happened to take place whenever Sean was at work and Jodie was home alone. There was even one occasion when Jodie heard some strange noises outside her house and was convinced that someone was watching her, but when the police stopped by to check it out, no one was there. This suggests that the caller knew the couple personally and had some familiarity with their routine, and well, if this was all related to the situation at the casino, they would have known when Sean was working his shifts. I'm not sure if law enforcement ever checked phone records to determine where these calls originated from, but perhaps the caller made them from a public payphone rather than their own personal phone. And even if investigators managed to figure out who the caller was, there were no calls made to the farmhouse on the night of the murder, so that doesn't necessarily mean that the caller and the shooter were the same person. Another big unanswered question is if the perpetrator had a personal grudge against Jodie and wanted to kill her, why did they open fire at the house on a night that Sean was there? By Sean's own admission, if he hadn't ducked for cover in the kitchen when the shooting started, he likely would have been killed too, since a bullet wound up piercing through the recliner that he had been sitting in and would have gone through his midsection. Well, if the crime was connected to all the drama from the casino, let's not forget that there seemed to be some professional resentment towards Sean as well, because he was given a high management position, even though he was only half Native American and a member of the Sicangu Lakota tribe, not the Kickapoo tribe, and was hired based on his uncle's experiences with running Native American casinos. I suppose an alternate possibility is that whoever fired those shots wasn't intending to kill Jodie or Sean at all, and only wanted to scare them, but Jodie wound up being struck in the head by a stray bullet while she was in the bedroom. Of course, given the amount of bullets that were fired into the house, it's difficult to imagine the shooter doing that without the expectation that someone would be killed. But even though the authorities have been very tight-lipped about certain aspects of the investigation, they have expressed their belief that alcohol may have been a factor in what happened. The crime took place at around 12:40 a.m., so someone could have spent the night drinking too much and then just made a random spur-of-the-moment decision to grab a semi-automatic rifle, drive out to the farmhouse, and fire bullets into it without giving much regard to the consequences. It might seem like a major overreaction to murder Jodie and her unborn child over the possibility that she might get rehired at the casino, as that decision was not even official yet. And since Jodie was 7 months pregnant at the time, she may not have even began working there again until after Jordan Shay was born. But if you factor alcohol into this situation, that could have explained the sheer senselessness of this crime. If the murder was premeditated, it was an ideal location to do it, as the farmhouse was so isolated that the perpetrator could just wildly fire off a bunch of bullets without being seen by any witnesses. Unfortunately, since this was a crime involving firearms, there wouldn't be any DNA evidence to work with. I know that shell casings were collected from the scene, but investigators have not said much about what other evidence, if any, they have to work with. For instance, even though Sean said he heard the sound of a vehicle speeding away after the shooting stopped, and the residence had a gravel driveway, it's never been revealed if any tire tracks were found. Overall, this definitely sounds like one of those cases which will not be solved by physical evidence and will require someone to come forward with information. What we do know is that the authorities say they have narrowed down their list of potential suspects to 3, but since they've implied that multiple people were involved, it's unclear if they believe that all 3 of these suspects were complicit in the crime. Theoretically, could this mean that even if only one person did the actual shooting, there were others present when it happened? Since Sean said he never got the chance to look outside, we have no idea how many people were there. It sounds like all of these suspects have been interviewed by law enforcement at some point, but none of them cracked, and there was not enough evidence to file charges. Since the name of the former employee who got fired from the Golden Eagle Casino has never leaked publicly, I'm unable to look up any information about him to see what he's been up to since 1997, so even though he definitely sounds like he had a potential motive, I have no idea if he was one of the 3 aforementioned suspects, or seems like the type of person who would have been capable of a crime like this. However, it also sounds like there may be a number of local residents who were not directly involved in the crime, but might know some incriminating information which could help the investigation. It's been reported that certain members of the Kickapoo Tribal Council declined to be interviewed on Unsolved Mysteries because they received threats to their life. And as much as I hate to say it, there may be some people in the community who feel that Jodie deserved what she got. That's why I thought it was very important for Tribal Council Chairperson Nancy Baer to appear on Unsolved Mysteries to drive home the point that the murder of a woman and her unborn child is wrong under any circumstances, which is why anyone with information needs to speak up and break the code of silence, even if they feel it could affect their standing in the community. This is why it's bad luck that the murder scene just happened to be located outside the boundaries of the Kickapoo Reservation, because if this had become a federal case and the FBI was able to take over the investigation, it may have provided the extra pressure to compel someone to talk. Whenever I watch older segments from Unsolved Mysteries, one thing which really drives home the point of how much time has passed is when I realize that the children of many of these victims are now adults. And that also rings true for child victims such as Jodie Bordeaux, because if this crime had not occurred and her mother was able to give birth to her as planned, Jordan Shay would now be 27 years old and possibly even have a family of her own. But because she had her life taken away from her before she was born, she was deprived of these opportunities. I do hope this case never leaves the spotlight until it is solved and the Bordeaux family finally receives justice. So if you have any information on the murder of Jodie Bordeaux, please contact the Brown County Sheriff's Office at 785-742-7125. That's 785-742-7125. You can also contact the Kansas Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-572-7463. That's 1-800-572-7463. So, like I mentioned in the intro, I want to take a few moments to discuss the murder of another pregnant woman named Amanda Aldridge. This particular crime took place in 2020 in Calhoun, Louisiana, an unincorporated community located in Washita Parish, which only had a population of 670 at that time. At around 6:30 p.m. on April the 19th, the Washita Parish Sheriff's Office were dispatched to a residence on Richard Linder Road and found the body of 21-year-old Amanda Lee Aldridge. At the time, Amanda worked as a waitress and was 30 weeks pregnant with a baby girl and was so excited about becoming a mother that she had already named her unborn daughter Tiara Rose. But unfortunately, Amanda had been fatally shot, and both she and Tiara Rose were pronounced dead at the scene. Now, as far as I can tell, this crime got zero media coverage at all when it originally happened, and the first mention I can find of it on social media is a Facebook post which was made by the Washita Parish Sheriff's Office in August of 2021, 16 months after the murder originally took place. In April of 2022, the case finally got some coverage on KTVE Channel 10, the NBC affiliate for Washita Parish, as part of their Arklama's Most Wanted series, which features unsolved cold cases from Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Ever since then, Arklama's Most Wanted has aired a segment about Amanda's murder on the anniversary of the crime each year, and in April of 2024, they finally featured an interview with Amanda's mother, Beth Smith, and sister, Summer Whitehead, who revealed that she happened to be 4 months pregnant herself at the time Amanda was killed. Unfortunately, virtually no information about the crime has been released publicly, other than the fact that investigators interviewed several people and followed many leads, but they have never been able to make an arrest, and thus far, no one has been named as a suspect or person of interest. I was able to find Amanda's obituary, which listed the name of Tiara Rose's father, but I have no information about the status of his relationship with Amanda at that time or how law enforcement views him. I can't even tell you any details about the circumstances of how Amanda was killed, as I have no idea if the assailant was inside the residence when they shot her, or if she was shot by a bullet that was fired from outside, much like Jodie Bordeaux. Needless to say, without knowing anything about Amanda or her background, I have no idea what the motive for this crime was and who could have been responsible. I can definitely understand why law enforcement would withhold a lot of details from the public in order to protect the integrity of the investigation, but unfortunately, there just isn't much information to work with, and other than those yearly Arklama's Most Wanted segments on KTVE, it appears that this story has gotten virtually no media coverage. But I thought I would at least mention this case on the podcast because the murder of a pregnant woman and her unborn child is definitely a crime that deserves attention. So if you happen to have any information about the murders of Amanda and Tiara Rose Aldridge, please contact the Washita Parish Sheriff's Office at 318-324-2669. That's 318-324-2669. You can also contact Crime Stoppers at North Delta at 318-388-CASH. That's 318-388-2274. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened in either of these cases, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the past 7 years, our Patreon page has released nearly 90 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released a bonus episode about Robert Weeks, a serial killer who was believed to be responsible for the murders of at least 4 victims whose remains could not be found, and has the distinction of being the subject of the very first case from Unsolved Mysteries to ever be solved. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and one of my co-hosts, Jules, traveled to the United Kingdom to discuss the unexplained 1976 death of Peter Watts, who was killed under mysterious circumstances after making a trip from his hometown in Wales to London. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have nearly 80 of these commentary tracks in our archives. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Emily Z, Carol H, Belly Option, and Douglas. Thank you all so much for your support. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composed the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. So have yourselves a great week and join us next Wednesday for another brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.